Welcome to the chaos sector. At this point, we can confirm that the Idaho murders have key details that have not been released to the public. And this creates mystery. And as the saying goes, when there's mystery, there's secrecy. And when there's secrecy, there's conspiracy. You may not agree, but if information is withheld, it's a conspiracy by default. Conspiracies have levels of severity, but in the case of murder, information or even evidence kept secret from the public obviously can lead to a cover-up. Once again, I want to thank the viewer who pointed out our error. Because it not only led to an improved analysis, but it also raised another important question. Since we now know, well, we knew, but had an examining error, that Kernodle was on the second floor, this means the activity on that floor is magnified even more. What do I mean? Let's break it down. Mortensen claimed to have heard someone state, "There's someone here." Now this would be Kernodle. But it was assumed to be Gonsalves, from Mortensen's accounts, right? Interesting. Let's see. That's a bit odd, now that we look back at the original airing of that episode. If you recall, I broke down how it made more sense that it would be Gonsalves because I assumed she was on the second floor with Mortensen, right? But Mortensen claimed she thought it was Gonsalves who made the statement, who she knew was on the third floor, right? What am I getting at here? Something that could be damaging to her accounts of what happened, that's what. Stay with me. I believe Mortensen suggested it was Gonsalves, who was on the third floor, that made the statement, "There's someone here," because it draws attention to the third floor, as opposed to the actual floor that the statement was made from, which was the floor she was on. When Kernodle is heard crying by Mortensen, they are both on the same floor. But before she is heard crying, there is no information about what activity was taking place in between that time. Kernodle's concern of a home invader apparently didn't lead to any communication, other than just stating, "There's someone here?" She isn't heard saying anything else? Meaning, there is a moment of silence on the second floor, from the time she made that statement, to the point she is heard crying? Obviously there was no emergency text being exchanged with the peers, and of course no call to the authorities. Speaking of the authorities, they did a forensic scan of Kernodle's phone, and discovered she was on TikTok around 4 a.m., right? Well, apparently there is no evidence that she became aware of an intruder while on TikTok, so we have to assume she was notifying her boyfriend. I mean, who else would she be talking to? We have to keep addressing that, because it changes the setting in the home, leading up to the attacks. But nevertheless, this span of alleged inactivity has to have more, well, activity. Based on the report, Mortensen often opened her door, which means she also often closed her door. When she heard someone state, "There's someone here," she opened her door, then closed it. Then opened it again, and heard Kernodle crying. Then, closed the door again, opened it once more, then heard Kernodle crying once more? Why does she constantly open and close her door? If you suggest she was scared, concerned, paranoid, whatever state of awareness, this would lead to calling the authorities. Or at least, inquiring about your roommates. Based on her accounts, she woke up around 4 a.m. and heard what she assumed to be Gonsalves on the third floor, playing with her dog. Kernodle is also awake around this time. Soon after, Mortensen claims to have heard what she, quote, thought was Gonsalves state, "There's someone here." Mortensen told police that she did not see anything when she looked out of her bedroom for the first time after hearing the voice. Interesting, when she looked out of her bedroom for the first time after hearing the voice. So Mortensen looked out of the bedroom after hearing that statement, "There's someone here." Why would Mortensen assume it was Gonsalves making that statement? How could Mortensen even hear Gonsalves make that statement, which would obviously be very cautionary? Unless she heard that statement through her ceiling, how could she have heard that statement? It's possible to hear someone talking on a floor above you, but since the roommate is aware of a home invader, she couldn't have been talking loud enough for Mortensen to hear her one floor down. Especially if we go with the narrative that somehow this is some sort of thought to self, right? I mean, pick your poison here. Either they were literally speaking to themselves, which in most cases is considered a, quote, inside voice. Or, they were speaking to someone else. This has to be clarified, because it determines who was awake, what decisions they made regarding an intruder, and what Mortensen's interaction would be in eventually being notified about this intruder as well. Come on, this needed to be clarified, but it wasn't. If Gonsalves was talking to Mogan, we can assume she would damn near be whispering to Mogan, right? Which we know Mortensen definitely couldn't hear with her door closed. Remember, her door was closed when the statement was made, then after hearing that statement, she opened her door. These are just questions that are questioning the accounts of what led up to the murders. Another mystery, how could Gonsalves become aware of a home intruder before Mortensen did? We assume she became aware based on observation. The only way she would know there is a stranger in the home would be to physically spot them or have her door open to hear the intruder. Yet, how did the intruder travel through the second floor without being detected by either strange sounds or movement by Mortensen or Kernodle, who was also awake during this time frame? Simply put, someone on the third floor became aware of an intruder before individuals on the second floor did. This is highly unlikely unless those on the second floor were, well, asleep. But bingo, Mortensen and Kernodle were not asleep. Keep in mind, the second floor is where the suspect entered the home. This is all broken down based on the claim that it was Gonsalves who made the statement. Taking very meticulous steps through this, I hand the rest of the report over to my colleague.
Thanks. Let me touch on a few key aspects. It is likely here that Mortensen suggested it was Gonsalves, instead of Kernodle, due to proximity. The further away the statement was made, or a better term, was heard, the less awareness she would have. Here's why: because she closed her door, which indicates, in a subjective approach, that Mortensen may have not been as concerned about that statement. It could be considered, quote, indifferent. But when she heard cries, and the suspect's voice, this is when Mortensen became concerned. The intruder entered the home through the second floor. In this setting, he would be snooping around, footsteps would be heard, strange noises, heck, even his frequency could be picked up, while he walked through the home. Yes, you can detect someone, without physically seeing them. Since it was Kernodle who became aware of this intruder, this demands more concern from Mortensen on that same floor. Gonsalves would not be aware of a home intruder, before someone on the second floor. It's just common sense. The suspect would walk up a small hill and enter the home through the sliding doors. Keep in mind, the authorities claim there was not, I repeat, was not, forced entry. Let's examine the home from the view of each victim's location. Based on this 3D layout of the home, Kernodle and Chapin are to the left side of the entrance. As displayed, it shows that Kernodle and Chapin were murdered first, then Gonsalves and Mogan. If we examine this layout, and the path the killer took, we see what was reported to have taken place that night in chronological order. Number 1, killer quietly breaks into home around 4 a.m. Number 2, murderer fatally stabs Xana Kernodle and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin to death. Number 3, killer also butchers Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogan to death, in Mogan's bed. Number 4, surviving housemate Dylan Mortensen sees masked man, in the corridor between floors, who walked past her. Number 5, Mortensen tells police the man slipped out the back sliding glass doors, and fled around 4:25 a.m. Approximately, it took about 20 minutes, for the suspect to kill 4 people, which some put up a struggle. Perhaps with a gun, as one bullet could end one's life instantly. But with a knife, it takes hard work to physically stab someone to death, let alone 4 of them. Remember, some of the victims put up a fight, so even if this is one victim, this would take some time. Multiple stab wounds does not mean someone will die neither, which also brings into question, did those victims die based on multiple stab wounds? You know what, let's address that for a moment. I have no filter, so I will point this out. Autopsy reports state the victims died from stab wounds, but they don't detail where those stab wounds were. Usually, when there are homicides, especially with weapon-based fatalities, autopsies detail everything regarding the weapon used. For example, such as a death from stabbings, the autopsy report will detail where those stab wounds were located on the victim, such as on the neck, chest, arms, head, wherever they were stabbed, right? No details of this. If they died from stab wounds, as they were found in their bedrooms, surely they would literally bleed to death, right? But let's be very careful here. If they are left bleeding to death, there is no doubt, I repeat, there is absolutely no doubt, those victims tried to survive with their last moments of life. And it's not just one victim, there are 4. Young people, who have more willpower to live, more willpower to fight back. Even if they couldn't physically fight back to make a difference in their demise, surely they fought to stay alive, before that last heartbeat. There should be trails of blood on the floor, from where they were initially stabbed, to the point where they finally collapsed and passed away. Or blood on the door handle, the night post, the floor, at the edge of the bed, or the window. Areas where the victims physically would attempt to reach, fighting to stay alive. Keep in mind, the killer didn't slit their throats while they slept, negative. In that scenario, it is more likely that he could, quote, kill them while they slept, as the report claims. That's not how it played out, based on the same reports stating some of them had defensive wounds. There was physical engagement involved. Maybe not with all of them, but 2 of the 4 victims were obviously awake, which brings me back to an initial point. About them notifying their roommates. We are going in circles here. Logic, something that will never change, despite whatever scenario we face in life. But apparently, this does not exist, based on the so-called forensics of the detectives. Now, what this is indicating to me, and I'm pretty sure you have the same hunch, is that perhaps they did not die from being stabbed. Or, they were never stabbed to begin with. Perhaps, they were drugged to death. No blood found at the crime scene, no blood found on any of the victims, nor of the suspect at the crime scene, and no details of where the stab wounds were located. They didn't even provide details of where the defensive wounds were located on the victims. There is an extremely blurry picture here, which needs to be cleared, but let's start from number 2. Let's evaluate the first murders. The suspect would be discovered by Kernodle, who stated, "There's someone here." But, who is she talking to? Okay, I guess we can put that to the side for now. No wait, we can't. Kernodle has to be notifying her boyfriend, it's the most logical scenario. We keep reiterating, the reports claim the victims put up a fight, and had defensive wounds. Let's just go ahead and assume, the first set of victims were the first to put up a fight. Why? Well, to be honest, Kernodle was already awake, so it's likely she put up a fight. Ethan, being a male, we assume didn't die so quickly, unless it was a fatal blow, right? A male's adrenaline would skyrocket facing danger, his instinct to survive would take over. And, he has his girlfriend there to protect as well, which gives him even more adrenaline. And what do males do when they're faced with danger? They fight. This again, means there had to be a struggle here first, before the suspect could even get to the 3rd floor. And since there was a struggle here first, this means Mortensen is obviously aware of this activity. Being in close proximity of this activity, on the same floor, why would Mortensen claim it was Gonsalves, on the 3rd floor, who became aware of an intruder in the home, instead of Kernodle? Perhaps as mentioned, to draw attention away from this floor, and focusing on Gonsalves a floor above. But it really doesn't matter what she said, because the first victims were on the 2nd floor. We only deal with logic here. Keep in mind, Kernodle is on the same floor as Mortensen, who often opened and closed her door. There had to be more noise, and activity, than just hearing Kernodle cry. I don't think her accounts of just hearing Kernodle crying, and a man's voice state quote, "It's okay, I'm here to help you," is believable anymore. Why isn't there any screaming from Kernodle? She would scream, to alert her peers, and her boyfriend, that they claim was asleep. The only scenario where Kernodle would be crying, was if she was home alone, or her friends were all dead already. In those scenarios, she would feel a sense of hopelessness. Do you understand? But since there are roommates in that home, she would scream out to them. Which begs the question, was Kernodle actually crying? Feeling hopeless, defeated, in the face of a killer would do this. Being scared is also a reason to cry, but more so, you would be heard screaming out, to your peers, for help. So just claiming she was heard crying, appears to be a false depiction of Kernodle's predicament. Because if Kernodle is heard crying, along with screaming, and you heard a man's voice, you have to call the authorities, immediately. But, if it's this subdued atmosphere you depict, it's as if Kernodle is sad her pet passed away. Not to be sarcastic, but that's how Kernodle's so-called cries are being pictured to me. And this leads to severe suspicion upon Mortensen and her accounts. Let's revisit something, to make sure we're on the same page. If Mortensen had her door closed, when the statement was made about an intruder, how exactly did she hear this clearly? She is on a floor beneath Gonsalves, and her door was closed. Gonsalves would not speak too loudly about this potential danger, because you don't want to alert the intruder about your location in the home, right? So, how did she hear such a faint statement by Gonsalves? And we must keep questioning, who are either of these roommates talking to? They have to be talking to individuals who are accompanying them in their rooms, right? For Gonsalves, it would be Mogan. On a side note, Gonsalves was not discovered deceased in her own bedroom, she was with Mogan. For Kernodle, it would be her boyfriend Chapin. I believe, this statement was never made, simply due to the fact that it causes each individual to notify the roommates they are with in the home. And in that scenario, you have multiple people awake, which leads to more resistance against the intruder. And, more people to notify the authorities. Do you understand? Okay, now we move to number 3. The suspect is now a killer, who travels upstairs, and stabs Gonsalves and Mogan to death. The problem here is if Mortensen claimed it was Gonsalves who stated, "There's someone here," and Gonsalves was found in Mogan's bedroom, doesn't this mean Gonsalves was talking to Mogan about this? Warning, here's a very devastating point. If Mortensen claimed it was Gonsalves who stated, "There's someone here," and then Kernodle is heard crying, and a male's voice is also heard, what exactly is Gonzalez doing at this moment? I'm pretty sure she heard everything Mortensen heard regarding Kernodle and the male, right? Shouldn't she be calling the authorities? We have to assume that Mogan is also now aware of everything unfolding. Obviously Gonsalves wouldn't keep this information from her if she was alleged to be asleep, right? Inconsistent and unrealistic accounts from Mortensen raise severe questions about what truly happened that night. How could the killer travel through the second floor, walk upstairs, and not be heard by Mortensen, yet she claimed Gonsalves heard someone in the home from the third floor? If Gonsalves heard someone in the home from the third floor, surely Mortensen would hear the suspect traveling throughout the home, right? Based on her own accounts, she often checked everything out by opening her door throughout the entire time frame. So since she has become more attentive to what may be going on in the home, surely she would literally know at the point of Kernodle and Chapin's death that a killer is in the home. There's no other conclusion here, we only deal with logic. Let's move on to number 4. At this point, there are 4 slain roommates in the home, and the killer is heading back downstairs. And once he arrives on the second floor, Mortensen claims to have spotted him walking through the hallway. Now, obviously this is a very suspicious moment, due to the suspect literally disregarding Mortensen. Her accounts claim that she observed the suspect walk past her, right? If you are questioning our analysis in any way, can you please explain why a killer would allow a witness to survive? And it's not as if she had just arrived to the home, and they both spotted each other from a distance. Negative. They physically have to be within 5 to 10 feet from each other. So at this distance, the killer decides to spare this young lady, but was extremely brutal to 4 other college students? Make of it what you will, we only deal with logic here. Finally, number 5. Apparently, Mortensen continued to observe the killer as he exited the home, the same path he took entering. This is reported to be around 4:25 a.m., right? Mortensen stood frozen and shocked at what she had witnessed, right? But, ironically, she was able to give a description of the suspect, despite it being at night, and the suspect wearing a mask over his face. It doesn't matter that the mask didn't cover his face completely, her description was very detailed, despite being frozen in a shocked state. Can we suggest that perhaps Mortensen was frozen and shocked when she noticed her friends had been stabbed to death? Now that is a more realistic scenario and reason for being shocked to the point you can't move. It would be surreal, where your brain is attempting to comprehend what your eyes have seen. The information is being sent to the brain, but the brain rejects it, due to it not seeming real. So you stand there, frozen, shocked, because the brain is attempting to collect various information that justifies what you are seeing is in fact real. And then, you come back to reality, as the brain collects the data it needs to confirm what you have witnessed was real. This all happens in a matter of seconds, by the way. I think it's safe to say at this point, someone has not been truthful about what happened that night. Remember, based on the chain of events, the suspect murdered Kernodle and her boyfriend first, then, traveled upstairs, and murdered Gonsalves and Mogan next. Then, came back downstairs, walked past Mortensen, and exits the home. And throughout his so-called silent assassination of those roommates, Mortensen never felt anyone was being harmed in the home. But we can't claim it was a silent assassination, because the victims put up a struggle and suffered defensive wounds. So there is no question this physical activity is accompanied by screaming. Have you ever been stabbed? Do you know what that feels like? You will without a doubt scream. So that is also being left out of the equation in this case, for some odd reason. Remember, Mortensen was also aware that there was an intruder in the home. So his path throughout that home, traveling on both the second and third floors, doesn't warrant Mortensen to call the authorities? This is not looking too good on her behalf, and perhaps even for the prosecution. It seems Mortensen's accounts have been, unfortunately, fabricated. And if there's deception with a witness's accounts, this could lead to all types of problems. Then we also have to factor in the first floor. Bethany Funk was on the first floor, right? Now if Mortensen claimed to have heard Gonsalves on the third floor, we have to assume that Funk at some point was awakened by the suspicious activity on the second floor directly above her. And ultimately, the audio of a dog barking, someone whimpering, and the so-called thud sound that was allegedly captured by a security camera next door. If that audio was captured by a neighbor's security camera from outside the home, surely individuals inside the home, you know what, that's enough. Once again, we only deal with logic, not emotions. With that being said, we must continue. This is the chaos sector.